Well, while I'm on my sabbatical, I want to share with you another tour of one of the fabulous gardens that we saw when we were in Scotland. This one definitely was one of the favorites of the group, and as I recall, it was the favorite of our guide, and that is Carolside Gardens. And if you wait until the end, we're going to show you contact information for where this garden is located, what their opening hours are, etc. So if you are traveling through the Scottish countryside and you want to visit this on your own, you'll have contact information and know the dates that it is open. Carolside is an 18th century mansion that is set in really just a gorgeous, beautiful parkland area in a valley in the Scottish borders. It's very romantic. What I loved about it the best perhaps was that it was framed by steep wooded hills, and the river Leader ran through it, so you could go from the highly cultivated area of the garden with its herbaceous borders and its roses and its flowers, its perennials, but then you could take a break and you could go down to what they call the wilds over there along the river Leader. It's really, really spectacular. Lots of sweeping lawns, an overwalled garden with probably one of the most extensive collections of historical ancient roses in Scotland. I mean, especially the Gallicas, the Bourbons, they were absolutely fabulous. So if you are into roses, you'll want to pay careful attention to those. It is basically, well, it's just almost too much. It was really hard to capture because there were so many garden rooms, there were so many different areas that you could wander through. So I want to just kind of give you the opportunity to experience it the way I experienced it. So how we've edited this is very slowly. So when we put up each frame, if you really want to deconstruct a frame, then you can do so. You can pause on it. You can really look and see if you can analyze what specific plants are growing within that context. But I would also recommend, if you just want to experience it as a beautiful video, then I encourage you to do that and just step up the speed time in how you view it. Go from normal time to 2 times or 1.7 times, however you find it most relaxing to experience. But this way, those of you who really, really want to take apart each vignette and see what it is composed of, then you can do that, but you can also watch it more quickly if you want to speed up the pace of it. All of this beauty, for the most part, is sequestered behind walls that have the advantage of protecting the garden from high winds and harsh temperatures, which makes this magical and almost perfectly benevolent climate for gardens that much more appropriate to anything they want to grow there. And coincidentally, it does block the view from the 18th century house, which is kind of a unique Scottish feature. So here are the things that were my main takeaways in the garden in its totality when I was looking at my notes afterwards. First of all, I'm not sure where they appear, but this is a very common sense thing. When you see the hostas, there's a whole array of hostas that's planted below an evergreen hedge. I want you to notice that there is not one hole in the hostas. There's not one snail bite. There's not one slug bite. It's absolutely a miraculous thing. Obviously, the roses, that's the big takeaway from this garden because of its collection of roses. All of the colors of them, the way they climb, the way some of them swale on chain link that they have that rises above the garden walls. They climb on the house, they climb up through trees, a lot of different ways that they make their roses go vertical and are able to pack even more of those beauties into their garden than they would be otherwise. Another thing that I really paid attention to, again from a practical perspective, was how they staked their plants. Because like any true cottage garden, and particularly the herbaceous perennial borders, they are cram-packed full. Most of the time you can't see any exposed soil whatsoever. But at a young age, all of those plants, so they would not flop over, had to be staked. So if you really look into the interior of the herbaceous areas, you can see the different kinds of pretty resourceful ways that they staked different paths. I think that what was most noticeable to me as I wandered this garden, and I would repeat my wandering, I would go back to some of the my favorite areas again, was just how different you felt emotionally based on the color palette of the areas you were in. So very much in one way, I had a certain kind of underlying mood when I was in the areas that had the pinks and the purples and the whites and the magentas even, contrasted with the areas that you will notice have just more yellows and whites, and there's definitely an emotional shift. So as you are looking through it, you might want to observe it from that perspective. I absolutely adored the orchard area and the meadow. It might have been, by the time we saw this garden, we had seen so many spectacular perennial borders with really almost unbelievably, they didn't even look real, towering delphiniums and other kinds of things that we could only dream of growing here. So it was a nice contrast to see this fabulous meadow that was also an orchard. And if you notice the way that the paths were mowed through the meadow to make passage easier, it made it just very much kind of a wild, naturalistic vibe that was wonderful. But you could do the same thing if you had a prairie garden and you gardened with lots of natives and native grasses and such. You could mow those same kind of paths. So that was something that I took away. I also took away that was the best shortbread I had on the entire trip. So practically everywhere you went, there was the classic traditional Scottish shortbread, but definitely here in the little outbuilding that was so charmingly set up for us with real teacups for our tea or coffee, there was a platter of shortbread. And I noticed that the shortbread was made with Christmas cookie cutters. So it was definitely homemade shortbread. It was so thick, so thin and crisp and delicate. It was definitely my favorite shortbread. And yes, I went back for multiples. And the way they had it set up in this outdoor garden room was eminently charming. It was absolutely just delightful, as were the hosts. Look at the towering hedges, lest you become green with envy as you wander through this garden. Note the amount of work that is required to keep this looking so immaculate. Let's put it this way, lots of ladders, lots of individuals helping them prune the tops of these sky-high hedges. It's just a thing to behold. And in one short video that I took, you'll notice that the individuals that are helping out with that trimming are doing it by hand. I did not see an electric trimmer anywhere on the property. Really unbelievable. For my own very specific personal takeaways, I noted that in my garden I want to incorporate more sword life vertical plantings or sword-like leafy vertical plantings in the way of irises and such, because that played a prominent role there. I particularly liked the variegated foliage of the irises that they had. And so that was a very specific takeaway for me, even though very few of them at the time were in bloom. Nevertheless, they contribute to the overall beauty and texture of the garden, even devoid of any kind of flowers. And then, okay, here was definitely where I had lust in my heart, and that was in the glass house, where there were so many pelargoniums, so many just beautiful scented geraniums. So for me, I took lots of pictures of those because I thought this is how I want to clip and prune some of the ones that I have in my scented geranium collection. And I did lose a number of scented geraniums when I moved from my former home to this one. So I'm going to have to give my friend Monica a call to replenish my collection. That was, I mean, they just made me swoon. They were absolutely so beautiful. And then lastly, look at the ways, the many, many ways that they framed the views through portals, through the use of pergolas and garden ornament. It seemed like every bench somehow was framed within something over which something else was growing. I also loved the way that the painted color palette of the furnishings in the garden, how it morphed from one area to another. So you'll notice in some areas it's kind of a turquoisey sky blue, but in other areas the painted wooden furniture is white. There was a spectacular, really striking wooden door that was in a color that I can't even describe. It was so spectacular. And it was that color, that maroon, magenta, deep cardinal purple. That was another color that I decided I wanted more of in my garden. So those were some of my last observations. I hope you enjoy this every bit as much as I. Again, as a reminder, at the end there will be information if you want to visit this garden, more about the history of the place, if you want to do a deep dive into researching it, but also how you can contact them, and maybe if we can find it online, a little bit of an idea about how all of these various garden rooms, the potager, etc. are laid out. So enjoy, savor it, and please let me know in the comments what ideas you took away for your own gardens.
Yeah, really good.